Good morning to you. Good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, good morning. Won't you share with a friend or two? Good morning, good morning, good morning to you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Daring Dialogues. I'm your host, Shantae Charles. I'm enjoying my Women's History Month cup. It's got all kinds of cool things on it. It says Soul Sisters, Girls Get It Done, Do Your Thing, You've Got This, Unstoppable Woman. So I'm excited about today. I'm going to get right into our readings because we have several of them. And as you know, we started talking about vindicating the vixens on yesterday. So we are going to continue that. We'll probably Exactly. True prophets can be nothing less than extraordinary. I believe that. True human beings can be nothing less than extraordinary too. Um, Vindicating the vixens, revisiting sexualized, vilified, and marginalized women of the Bible. We're probably this week only going to be able to get through the first chapter, so I'm going to keep reading it throughout this week. But we will revisit this book. Okay. Yeah, I encourage people to get this book because it's already a powerful premise. So let me give you what our giveaway is for today, so you all will have that up front. Believe it or not, no one answered the giveaway from yesterday, and the giveaway was very simple. All right, just tell me who you think is the most influential female or woman in entertainment. Who is the most influential woman in entertainment and why? Give me your take on it. And those of you who submit something, you can still submit, and we're still going to do a drawing for the first giveaway for Monday. Today's giveaway is a $5 gift card, a $5 Starbucks gift card. And all you have to do for today's challenge is tell me to participate in the drawing for today. Tell me 3 books written by Maya Angelou. That's all you have to submit. You can submit it by email at reachshante@gmail.com. 3 books written by Maya Angelou. All right. So let's get into some Women's History Month facts here. I'm going to give you some again from the urbanintellectuals.com women's history cards. And I like these because they do sort of present day history makers, past history makers, and then also ancient history makers. And this one is Amina, Queen of Zaria. Now, I actually know somebody who has named their child Zaria, and I wonder if they know that this was the Queen of Zaria. Amina, ancient queen, Amina, Queen of Zaria. And I have a cousin named Amina. She lived from 1533 to 1610. She was a 16th century warrior queen of present day Nigeria. She is best known for her impressive military skills and her ability to lead the cavalry. She conquered much of North Africa for the Hausa people during her 34-year reign. She was accredited as a brilliant architect who constructed strong earthen walls around the cities that she built and seized. She overcame traditional gender roles by refusing to marry or have children. Queen Amina's life was the inspiration for the television series Xena, Warrior Princess. So her life was taken and turned into a television series. All right. And I'll put that up close to the screen for those of you who are screenshotting. Good morning, Lady Ravonda. Good morning, Lady Barbara, Prophet Jonathan, Pastor Ben, Deacon Henry, Lady Latoya. All right, those are those who are in my chat box today. All right, Carol Mosley Braun, fairly new in history. Carol Mosley Braun was born August 16, 1947, and she is still alive. She is an attorney, activist, and politician. She earned a law degree in 1972 and took a position as a U.S. attorney in Chicago in 1973. While serving as a Democratic representative to Illinois House of Representatives, she advocated for social change, education reform, and health care reform. She was the first African American woman to be elected to the U.S. Senate in 1992. She fought for civil and women's rights and called for more restrictive gun laws during her time as a senator. She served as U.S. Ambassador to New Zealand and Samoa under President Bill Clinton in 1999. She campaigned for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2003, but dropped out early in the race to join the private sector. All right, Carol Mosley Braun. I wonder what she thinks about the presidential candidates today. All right, our next one, Carlotta Lukumi. Carlotta Lukumi. All right. Born, date unknown, but she lived until 1844. She was also known as La Negra Carlotta. She was a rebel resistance leader and freedom fighter, forced into slavery in Cuba after being kidnapped from West Africa as a child. Musically inclined, Carlotta used talking drums to communicate coded messages with other slaves as a way to plan a revolt. A lot of people don't realize that drums were taken from many of the slaves for that very reason because they were using drums to communicate messages about escape and revolt. Also, some people don't realize that the women were forbidden from braiding their hair at one point because they were putting escape routes, they were braiding escape routes and maps into their hair to help people escape. All kinds of wonderful creative things that people will do to escape tyranny. She led the 1843 raid that freed dozens of slaves from captivity. She used the machete to forcibly overthrow Spanish landowners. You got to be a bad mamma jamma if you are overthrowing tyranny with a machete. All right? Just consider they had guns and you were going up against guns with a machete. She was captured a year after the revolt began, but not before liberating slaves from many different plantations in the area. So, yeah, she was a freedom fighter. She inspired many other uprisings of those wanting to see an end to slavery in Cuba. That's La Negra Carlotta. All right, last one for today. Billie Holiday, born April 7th, 1915, passed away July 17th, 1959. Yes, Lady Ravonda, she was not playing. Uh-oh. Where are the Warrior Queens in 2019? Sounds like a real conference, right? I would go to that conference. Warrior Queens in 2019. Billie Holiday, considered one of the best and most influential jazz vocalists of all time, her legacy still influences jazz and many other genres to this day. Despite no formal music training, she developed new vocal techniques and was known for her unique vocal delivery and improvisational skills. She was discovered on the Harlem nightclub scene and signed in 1935. Her first hit, What a Little Moonlight Can Do, a collaboration with pianist Teddy Wilson, became a jazz standard. She has received 4 posthumous Grammy Awards, all for Best Historical Album. She herself was inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame in 1973. In her 1972 film adaptation of her autobiography, Lady Sings the Blues, she was portrayed by another legendary performer whose birthday is actually today, Diana Ross. In 2000, she was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Diana Ross received the honor on her behalf. Billie Holiday. All right, let's go to our next book here, which is The Little Book of Feminist Saints. That title just kind of tickles me. And let's tell you a little bit about Maya Angelou. And I'm actually really loving these illustrated photographs in this book. Someone did a really great job. Yes. Maya Angelou, they call her here the matron saint of storytellers, born 1928 in the United States. In times of strife and extreme stress, I was likely to retreat to mutism. Mutism is addictive, and I don't think its powers ever go away. This is a surprising admission for a woman who, by age 40, had lived in Egypt, in Ghana, and all around the United States, who worked as a professional dancer, a prostitute, an activist, a singer, a lecturer, and one who would go on to become a prolific writer. Severe childhood trauma from rape triggered Maya Angelou's mutism at the age of 8. And after her testimony in court, her rapist had been violently murdered. Her muteness lasted for nearly 5 years before lifting, but its dark appeal never left her. It's always there saying, "You can always come back to me. You have nothing to do, just stop talking." Angelou resisted the urge. At 41, she published her first and best known book, which tells the story of her early life's trauma. In plays, in poems, in autobiographies, in spoken word albums, in children's books, she would tell stories for the rest of her life. The writer has to take the most used, most familiar objects, nouns, pronouns, verbs, and adverbs, and ball them together and make them bounce and make them turn a certain way and make people get into a romantic mood and another way into an angry mood. She said at age 75, "I'm most happy to be a writer." I think that's very powerful that she struggled with returning to her muteness all her life. She struggled with it, but she fought it. And she resisted the spirit of, the Bible would probably call it a deaf and dumb spirit. She actually resisted it and went on to become a prolific writer and speaker. Let that marinate for a moment. All right, Phillis Wheatley, known as the matron saint of readers, born 1753 in West Africa. There are lots of statues around the United States to Phillis Wheatley, by the way. Phillis Wheatley was the first Black American to publish a volume of poems, and the second American woman to do so. Was called Phillis Wheatley, a name given to her not by her parents, but by her owners. The Wheatleys of Boston named her after the slave ship that carried her from West Africa. She was 7. The Wheatley family, known progressives, encouraged young Phyllis's education without any assistance from school education and by only what she was taught in the family, John Wheatley wrote. She, in 16 months' time from her arrival, attained the English language, to which she was an utter stranger before, to such a degree as to read any, the most difficult parts of the sacred writings, and to the great astonishment of all who heard her. Many colonists doubted the authenticity of Phyllis's talents, and to silent skeptics, she endured an examination in court. Just think about that. We don't think you're actually a smart Negro, so we're going to court examine you to prove your intelligence. Wow. When her collection, Poems on Various Subjects, Religious and Moral, was published in 1775, she became the most famous African on the planet, according to Henry Louis Gates Jr., the Oprah Winfrey of her time. Eventually gaining her freedom, she became a voice for the colonists as the American Revolution approached, writing such poems as To His Excellency General Washington. In 1776, Washington received her at his headquarters in Cambridge. Despite all her success and apparent patriotism, however, Wheatley recognized the complexity of her position, and her writing foreshadowed another great war, still nearly a century away. From her poem on being brought from Africa to America, she said, "Some view our sable race with scornful eye. Their color is a diabolic dye. Remember, Christians, Negroes, black as Cain, may be refined and join the angelic train." All right. Our next person is Sojourner Truth, known as the matron saint of orators. People often get Sojourner Truth mixed up with Harriet Tubman, by the way. She was the matron saint of orators according to this book, born 1797 in the United States. Man is so selfish that he has got women's rights and his own too. Sojourner Truth. Ouch. There exists no faithful transcript of Sojourner Truth's most famous speech, delivered at the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio, in 1851, and referred to by its refrain, "Ain't I a woman?" Now, most people who, if you study out the story of Ain't I a Woman, most people say that she did not, that what was recorded in the speech was kind of sort of done to make a mockery of her, but that was not actually how she spoke. She spoke very properly, but when it was recorded sort of as a broken English to try to make her seem unintelligent. That's what I've looked up. All right. Truth spoke off the cuff. She could not read or write. In Ohio's anti-slavery bugle, it was reported as one of the most unique and interesting speeches at the convention. It is impossible, the report said, to convey any adequate idea of the effect it produced upon the audience. Those only can appreciate it who saw her powerful form, her whole-souled, earnest gestures, and listened to her strong and truthful tones. In later retellings, her speech would be presented in a Southern dialect, as I just mentioned, when in fact she spoke with a Dutch accent, Dutch having been her first language. Remember, there's sort of this notion that if a black person does not speak English or cannot read or write English, then they must have been dumb, or they must have been unintelligent, or they must have been illiterate, when in fact, more than likely, they actually spoke another language such as Dutch or French or even Spanish. All right. So you have to kind of pay attention to that in history when they say, oh, they couldn't read or write. No, more than likely, they probably couldn't read or write English. Some of the Hebrews, by the way, were actually speaking and writing Arabic and Hebrew. Yeah. Though a symbol for emancipated slaves in the South, Truth was actually from New York. As Isabella Baumfree, that was her name, she was born into slavery in 1797 near the Hudson River. And as Isabella, she escaped to freedom along with her infant daughter after her owner reneged on his promise to emancipate her. "I did not run off, for I thought that to be wicked," she later said. "But I walked off." Oh, I didn't run away, I walked away, believing that all to be right. You promised me my freedom, you reneged, so I'm out of here. Only in 1845, as the historian Carlton Mabie told it, did Isabella emerge at the age of 46 as a national figure in the movements to advance the rights of women and black people. "The Lord gave me the name Sojourner," she said, "because I was to travel up and down the land, showing the people their sins and being a sign unto them." All right, go ahead, Prophet Sojourner Truth. "Afterward, I told the Lord I wanted another name because everybody had two names. And the Lord gave me Truth because I was to declare the truth to the people." Hughes, Oregon. Sojourner, you kept the faith and finished your course. And guess what? America's still not listening. How many black prophets have rolled through America and told them the same thing and they still not listening? Last person out of this book, Josephine Baker, known as the matron saint of the independent, born 1906 in the United States. Lovely, lovely artistic rendering here of Josephine Baker. In her 1954 film Zuzu, the first major motion picture to star an African American actress, Josephine Baker famously danced partnerless alongside her own shadow, smiling and shimmying in a glittering one piece. It is a fitting image for a woman who possessed the courage and dynamism of several people. The daughter of a washerwoman, nee Frida Josephine McDonald, she got her start dancing on street corners for change. One day I realized I was living in a country where I was afraid to be black. 2019. Has that changed? She later said, and so she sailed to Paris, where she rose to fame at the Foyer Bergère in Europe. She went on to be known as the Black as the Black Venus, the Amber Queen, the Creole Goddess. Pablo Picasso called her the Nefertiti of now. Two snaps, okay? She became a spy for the French resistance in the 30s and 40s, pinning messages inside of her underwear. In the 50s and 60s, she was an activist for the civil rights movement, appearing alongside Martin Luther King Jr. and Rosa Parks at the March on Washington. There were 4 husbands and 4 divorces. She adopted 12 children from all over the world, her rainbow tribe. Also, a slew of exotic pets, including a chiquita, a diamond collared cheetah from one of her Paris nightclub acts. In another, she wore a skirt made of rubber bananas. She adopted her country as well, becoming perhaps the only French woman to have been born in St. Louis, Missouri. Baker embodied a spirit from which it is still hard to look away. Regarding a clip from Zuzu posted on YouTube nearly 80 years later, a commenter wrote, "One of the first people to smile with their whole body." Josephine Baker. Wow. In case you all haven't noticed, many of our historic icons it seems like they have lived more than one lifetime, right? Dancer, author, philanthropist, speaker, prophet, writer, spy. Less freedom, but many more lifetimes. Selah. All right, we're going to pop on over here to our Black History segment at this time. A Black History reader. All of this is really Black History, by the way. A Black History reader, Dr. Claude Anderson, 101 questions you never thought to ask. Last week we were on the question of reparations. Now I'm going to read you one more segment, one brief segment in his book, answering this question. How does General Andrew Jackson historically fit into the present call of Black people for reparations? If you notice, the conversation about reparations is becoming more and more prominent. Trevor Noah, if you all are familiar with him, I don't have television, but I did see his clip running through Facebook about him talking about reparations and explaining, and I can't believe he had to explain to a white person the concept of reparations and why Black people in America have specific justice claims. That he, as a South African, gets it, and he's not even from here, and he understands why Black America has specific justice claims. You ought to check that clip out today. It's running around Facebook. Just type in Trevor Noah reparations and it should come up. All right? But historically, what is the tie to reparations and General Andrew Jackson? Actions taken by General Andrew Jackson established solid domestic and international legal grounds for black reparations. Free black people. That means those who were enslaved, those who were native to America already, because there were some of us here already, by the way, hint, hint. Free blacks had lived in Spanish Florida since the 1500s. Free black people are the ones who built St. Augustine. You know, that city in Florida that everybody loves to visit. Free black people built that. It was the oldest city and still is the oldest city in the continental U.S. The Spanish crown invited blacks to Spanish Florida and promised them rights to citizenship and land once they crossed the U.S. border into Florida. So, the whole notion of the Underground Railroad about people going north, some people did go north, but if you were in, say, South Carolina, or you were in Georgia, it would not have made sense for you to necessarily go north when you can go south into Florida and be on free land and be and basically get immunity or protection, right? So a lot of our ancestors who may have started out in slavery in Georgia, like my family, wound up in Florida. Yeah, because Florida was offering freedom and protection. So when you think about the Underground Railroad, I want you to think about more than just people who fled north and all the states they would have had to travel through. And you know, black people don't really like, we don't really do cold, especially if you came from Africa and the tropics. Just think about how much sense that would have made for you to want to keep traveling north into colder and colder and colder and colder and colder spaces to finally some of them made it to Canada. But a great deal of them did not travel north. They were traveling south to get to Florida, all right? Because they were promised the right of citizenship and they were promised land if they could make it to Florida, all right? And protection. Many accepted the invitation. Therefore, thousands of black settlers lived in Spanish Florida before it was sold to the United States. They owned and worked major portions of land, especially across North Florida and Central Florida, which at the time included southern portions of Georgia, Alabama, and much of Louisiana and Texas. So it's not necessarily the Florida that we know now, but it was a larger piece of territory. As a military general, Jackson had pursued black Spanish settlers and their property for decades. In 1814, in response to the urging of slaveholders in Georgia and Alabama, General Jackson made an end run around Congress, violated international boundaries, and invaded Florida at least twice, in 1812 and in 1818, for the specific purposes of capturing and killing black settlers and black Seminole Indians who had been granted Spanish citizenship, hence the Florida State Seminoles. White plantation owners saw these free blacks as a threat to their way of life and the institution of slavery in the southern states. General Jackson did their bidding. When he invaded Florida with a contingency of U.S. military troops and Creek Indians, he slaughtered hundreds of Spanish black settlers, captured the survivors, and seized the land they lawfully owned. Now, did you hear that piece in there about how the Creek Indians helped them to do that? All right. So when people talk about black and brown alliances and black people kind of look at you side eye like, there were some Indians that participated in our capture as well. And some of them haven't apologized for that either. But I digress. General Jackson's military invasions into Florida had no legal authorization from the highest levels of the federal government. He angered politicians in the nation's capital who responded by trying to court-martial him. However, the powerful Southern slave owners engaged aggressive legal counsel to defend Jackson and saved him from conviction. The legal arguments the Southern slaveholders used to defend General Jackson are important today for framing claims for black reparations. Southern slaveholders' arguments to defend him were: number one, any blacks living in Florida belonged to American slaveholders who had inherited ownership rights to blacks from their white ancestors who had at one time or another owned slaves. And two, they asserted that ownership rights of slaves automatically passes down from one slaveholding generation to the next generation of slaveholders. In short, they argued that all black adults and their children belonged to the descendants of white slaveholders forever, and they wanted all slaves returned. General Jackson and his followers accepted the inheritance claims of the slaveholders and used them as the basis for invasion, for his defense, and as justification for seizing lands owned by Spanish black settlers. Despite all of his unlawful activities, Andrew Jackson became President of the United States and continued his assault then against Native Indians and black settlers. So much for helping him to try to capture black people, Native Indians, because once he became president, he also turned against you as well. He presided over the Indian Removal Act of the early 1830s and the resultant Trail of Tears, a grueling cross-country march in which Native Indians and Spanish black settlers, who constituted 40% of those forced to march from Florida to the Oklahoma Territory. So it wasn't just the Cherokee and other Native Americans that were on this Trail of Tears peoples. It was also the Spanish black settlers that were also forced to march. Southern slaveholders took ownership of and enslaved all of the weak and compliant blacks who remained. So if you didn't hightail it out of there, you wound up being re-enslaved. The Trail of Tears, which actually became a trail of massacre, because even those who left, they began to execute them on the way to Oklahoma. This effectively cleared the land of both undesirable populations and left a clear path for the Southern plantation owners to own, control, and develop Florida land into what became the great wealth-generating Cotton Belt. And we wonder why Florida gets hit with so many hurricanes. When blacks mount a fight for reparations today, the issues presented by the actions of General Jackson should form the foundation for their demand of restitution. The major issues for reparations are: number one, in 1815, General Jackson captured, killed, and imported black settlers from Spanish territory as slaves into the United States. In doing so, he violated the prohibition in the Constitution that was ratified in 1789 that stipulated it was illegal to import slaves into the country after 1808. International law, various treaties, and the U.S. law. He piled legal violation upon legal violation. In his roundup of black people, he commingled settlers who were international citizens with no previous experience with slavery with those who had fled the U.S. to escape slavery and had become Spanish citizens. He transported all to the United States to be made slaves. So he made people who were already in Florida, who were free, he made them slaves too. And they had no experience with slavery. Uh-oh. You mean some of our ancestors were actually born free and made slaves? Bingo. Number two, Jackson's misuse of government, military, and other resources to invade another country multiple times made the U.S. government liable or responsible for the damages and the results of his unauthorized actions. His actions violated the law, and legal justification used by the slaveholders was unsound. That slave ownership passed from one white generation to the next and was perpetual. If that is true, then the corollary is also true. The responsibility for restitution for their illegal and immoral acts committed against these settlers also passed from one slaveholding generation to the next slaveholding generation that enjoyed the benefits of black enslavement. So if you're saying on one side that the slaveholders' benefits passed from generation to generation, then that means the payback, the damages of what they did passes from their generation to their current generation of ancestors. You know, the people who are still going around saying that their ancestors were slaveholders. That should apply in the reverse. It will continue to pass down through white families until reparations are made for physical, psychological, and financial damages inflicted on the descendants of 10 generations of black people. Jackson captured and killed Spanish black settlers. He stripped them of their born freedom, their citizenship rights, and their worldly possessions. Though his actions were illegal on several levels, the government has never paid restitution to the injured parties or their living descendants. The government has a clear moral and legal obligation to cross generational lines in reverse and use public resources to compensate the descendants of Spanish black settlers in Florida for the land and the lives that were stolen and the economic, emotional, educational, and social damages done to their ancestors. It would be a violation of the 14th Amendment's equal protection provision for the government to refuse to use its power and resources to right the wrongs inflicted by President and General Jackson. It is also the moral responsibility of blacks to use the foundation presented here to organize a public effort to seek restitution and reparations to restore what was stolen from black Spanish citizens. So, by their own legal precedent, the case has already and can already be made. All right. Let me go to Spare the Kids. Why Whooping Children Won't Save Black America. I know you guys thought we were going to escape this book, right? You thought you were going to escape it today? Not so. Black parents, let me talk to you. I'm still seeing black parents, especially Christian ones, talk about how they want to beat their child. May I encourage you to get this book. Black Christians, I'm talking to you especially. Stop beating your child. Stop laying hands in an ungodly way on your child. SpareTheKids.com. Go and order the book. Touch your neighbor and say, not so. So, we've been talking about, in this book, we've been talking about the history of whooping in America and beyond America, really, before they got to America. We are talking about extending the master's lash. Deacon Henry, don't you kid like that. So, we're talking now about the Puritans and how the Puritans treated their children. All right? We're only going to get to a page of this today because I do want to get back to vindicating the vixens. That's where we're going to end today. So let's take a look at the Puritans. Let's see what the Puritans were doing to their children. When the Puritans sailed from Great Britain and arrived in the forests of New England in the early 1600s, they not only were survivors of religious persecution, but also a culture of profound child abuse that is not a part of our Thanksgiving narratives. This history of abuse may explain why they were also violent with one another, with indigenous communities, and with enslaved Africans. This group of separatists from the Church of England came to America to begin new lives and to establish new colonies and cultures. They sailed the ocean blue with their generationally inherited traumas. Okay. Don't know who that was. They sail the ocean blue with their generationally inherited traumas, Christian and white supremacist worldviews, and a strong belief that children were potential threats to the social order. Not, I believe the children are our future. No, they believe children were threats to the social order. Beatings, rather than nurturing parenting, were needed in preparation for citizenship and salvation. Ouch. Ambitious and self righteous in ways that would make Donald Trump proud, the Puritans brought disease, love of warfare, and a delusional belief that God had chosen them to inherit an already occupied land. How do you believe that God chose you to inherit an already occupied land? They initially regarded the millions of indigenous people already living on the land as the lost children of God who could be brought out of ignorance to benefit from a higher civilization. So they initially, let's get this right. Let's take a moment here. They initially labeled the people they found here as the lost children of God, also known as the lost tribes, who could be brought out of ignorance to benefit from a higher civilization. They believed that they had been touched by God to create a quote unquote city upon a hill, founded on biblical teachings. This preordained manifest destiny of theirs and other European settlers and their descendants was to be achieved by stealing the continent and bringing the so-called gifts of democracy, civilization, and Christianity to people of color. For these early colonists, the New World was a violent and terrifying wilderness where they faced brutal life or death struggles. Yes, so they're playing ignorant now. Because when they got here, they said, oh, these are the lost people of God. And all of a sudden, oh, these are the lost people of God turned into, how can we get rid of all of them? In their new environment, the Puritans endured harsh winters, horrible plagues that they brought with them, by the way, poor harvests, hunger, imperial warfare, frontier vigilantism, rape, child abuse, and the ever present hand of the Grim Reaper, which snatched the lives of the young and old alike. Now, I have a real question about this because if you endured all of that once you stepped onto the grounds, it would seem like to me that if you was hearing from God, all of those could have been seen as signs to go back to where you came from. I'm just saying. You said you heard from God, but this is your fruit of landing on, traveling over here. All right? And this is not stuff that somebody did to you. This is stuff that came upon you when you came over. Has anybody examined that part? Okay. Now, here's the part that most people say. It's interesting that as all of this calamity, all of this stuff that they would call today curses, it's interesting that all of this calamity was happening to them. And yet the people that they saw or that they felt they needed to rescue actually came and rescued them. Lord, where's my organ? The indigenous people initially rescued white settlers from themselves. Just let that marinate. They rescued white settlers from some of these calamities by feeding and teaching them how to use the land. So, and entreated the stranger, and in repayment for rescuing them from themselves, they turned around and massacred the indigenous people. Let that marinate. They repaid kindness with genocide. Let that marinate. For those of y'all who think that if I just treat certain people, if I just treat them kindly, then they won't harm me. No, the religious Puritans who were starving, who were going through plagues, hunger, rape was in their camp. They were abusing their children, and the indigenous came and rescued them from themselves, and they turned around and massacred them. After they learned their skills to survive, then they massacred them. But we still, apparently, we ain't learned the lessons yet. But as the Puritans and other waves of European settlers acquired more experience in the New World, the Native Americans then were seen more and more as obstacles standing in the way of progress in civilization. So as they co-opted their culture, and as they co-opted their abilities, and as they co-opted the ability to survive in that land, then they turned around and now they became the Indian problem. They were no longer the Indian friend or the Indians who saved us from sure death. They were now the Indian problem who is standing in the way of our conquest, also renamed as progress, but really conquest. Heretics, witches, and those who had the nerve to question authority were also threats to Puritans' visions of a godly life. This godly life obviously included genocide of other people in order to, quote unquote, live their godly life. Religious dissenters, sexual fornicators were publicly whipped, branded with hot irons. For those of you all who like Greek fraternity, that's where that came from, by the way. Branded with hot irons, beheaded, and hanged, and burned at the stake. So if you didn't go along with this quote unquote New World Order, this godliness whose foundation was genocide of the indigenous people, if you didn't go along with that, you were publicly whipped or branded with irons or beheaded or hanged or burned at the stake. So who was really the Antichrist here? So despite stories of turkeys and funny hats, it shouldn't be surprising that a people who suffered such profound child abuse and witnessed public displays of sadism or sadism spent the next century engaging in genocidal terrorism that decimated Native communities. So how are you going to tell the natives about being human and being humane when this is your modus operandi? How are you going to preach to me about Christ when this is your modus operandi of how you deal with anything in the New World? If the Puritan so-called model of Christian community was to succeed, everybody had to assume an assigned place within the family, church, and society. White male supremacy reigned, and people were expected to accept authority and define limitations of their positions in life. And that included white women. Let's be clear. Individuals belong to society, not to themselves. So it was crucial to have a strict child rearing that produced orderly adults who respected authority and didn't breach the peace. The Puritans took the Bible literally. Remember, we started talking about that yesterday. They took the Bible literally, and they were serious about raising obedient kids. It was the sacred duty of parents to keep tight reins on their children and teach them respect in order to save them from a life of sin and their souls from hellfire. Ruling children through shame and harsh punishment was necessary because their wicked behaviors could bring the wrath of God down on the entire colony. They believed that harsh correction in this life by a parent was certainly nowhere near as bad as God's punishment. Spoiling children was discouraged even during infancy because, like their counterparts in Europe, the Puritans believed that children were born evil and with the stain of Adam's original sin on their souls, and so they had to be broken and civilized by beating the devil out of them. And there are people who believe this today. Yeah, when they misbehaved. I should note that this Christian concept that children are born innately wicked and shameful creatures was not part of the broad cultural thinking of Native American or West African societies before direct contact with Europeans and European Americans. So, next week, we're going to talk about what did Native Americans and West African peoples believe about their children? And how did their belief in their thought get overtaken by children are innately wicked and have to have the devil beat out of them? Because I can tell you right now, there are black people that believe that. All right, back to our last reading for today. Vindicating the Vixen. I will hold this up so you can screenshot the book in case you want to order it. Vindicating the Vixens. All right. Chapter 1, Tamar, the righteous prostitute. This is about to get really interesting. And we will cover some more of this again tomorrow. We'll probably be in this book most of tomorrow, seeing that it is Relationship Wednesday. War creates moral dilemmas. In Germany, during World War II, a young Jewish girl bravely faced a life-altering moral catch-22. German soldiers were rounding up Jewish friends and neighbors and transporting them to Nazi concentration camps. At any moment, she and her family could be next. Well aware that a concentration camp meant suffering and death to her entire family, she made a fateful moral decision. To rescue herself and her family from a horrific fate, she gave herself to the Nazi soldiers. From that day on, her self-identity changed forever. She saw herself as a prostitute. The successful rescue of the family she loved came at an unspeakable cost to her, leaving permanent scars of trauma that she would carry to her grave in dark secret that, if revealed, would brand her in the eyes of others with an indelible stigma as a Nazi collaborator, an immoral woman, or both. Instead of being hailed as the selfless hero she was, she'd be classed as damaged goods. Faced with the moral dilemma of either losing her entire family in a Nazi death camp or prostituting herself to the Nazis, she chose the latter. Bible stories also reveal moral dilemma. Tamar, the infamous Canaanite daughter-in-law of the Old Testament patriarch Judah, faced the life-altering moral dilemma as well. But it's difficult, if not impossible, for modern readers to view her in that light, because when we read her story in Genesis 38, the word prostitute leaps off the page and colors everything else we read or think about her. That one word says it all. Without a pause, the judicial gavel comes crashing down with a thud, and we become incapable of seeing that she is dealing with a complicated situation. Instead, with a single blow, Tamar is tried, convicted, and sentenced with no possibility of parole. Never will I forget the awful words of condemnation that thundered from the pulpit by one pastor. Tamar corrupted the line of Christ. we know anything at all about the story of Tamar and Judah, we know it is one of the most salacious moments in the entire Old Testament. I often tell people, if you like drama, if you like soap operas, if you like series television, there is no greater soap opera than the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis has some incredible stories centered around lust, power, relationships, men and women. So if you've never read Genesis through, I encourage you to do so. Because this particular story in Genesis 38 is like OMG, okay? Before what we know as the Real Housewives, the whole reality TV genre, Genesis 38 will give all of that a run for its money, okay? You have a father, you have two sons, you have a woman that marries both sons, you have the issue of masturbation. All of this is in Genesis. You have the issue of spilling your seed on the ground and what that means to God, and how God feels about men just dropping their seed anywhere and not producing. It's in Genesis 38. Okay? Okay. You have Tamar, who has to disguise herself as a prostitute in order to have relations with the father, because the father is like, I'm not giving up any more of my sons. It seems like this woman is no good. Is something wrong with her? All of that. All of the stuff that we kind of see today playing out in our society, it's in the Bible. Some of it, a lot of it is in the Bible. And I'm like, has anybody read this story? Because it's got some interesting things going on. So that's what we're going to talk about, okay? Genesis 38, if you haven't read it, please go read it, all right? Before we come back and talk about this tomorrow, because we're going to keep going, all right? So, Tamar is seen as the unscrupulous widowed daughter-in-law of the patriarch Judah, who had to disguise herself as a prostitute in order to seduce her own father-in-law. Now, if that's not soap opera material, I don't know what is. How could the story of Tamar be anything other than a scandal? Often pastors preaching through Genesis opt to skip over Tamar's story. I wonder why. Which interrupts the far more interesting and better known story about Joseph, popularized by Andrew Lloyd Webber in Tim Rice's Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat. The gripping story of Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery in Egypt, carries on seamlessly without her anyway, sparing the pastor from the awkward challenge of trying to explain this bewildering rated R story that's stuck right in the middle of Joseph's story. So it's almost like while Joseph was going through in Egypt, here's what was happening with Joseph's family and with his brother Judah. All right. So it's kind of like if you think about a movie or you think about a storyline, it's kind of like a scene shift to say, here's what was going on back home while this is what Joseph was enduring in slavery. All right. In addition to the obvious concern that such adult material is unsuitable for a general audience, pastors also face the daunting challenge of trying to salvage any useful application or word of inspiration to offer their congregations from this passage. Besides, just when suspense is heating up in the Joseph story and folks are hanging on to the edge of their seats, it seems counterproductive to then switch to this seemingly irrelevant story that will likely take the oxygen out of the sanctuary. Even those who courageously wade into this perplexing narrative seem to find little more than fodder for warnings about the seductions of manipulative, vindictive women. Some think Tamar was so selfishly determined to become a mother that she was willing to stoop to anything, even prostitution, to conceive a child, a method that allegedly gave her the added benefit of getting even with her unsuspecting father in law for breaking his word to her. All of this makes the prospect of rescuing Tamar from her vixen status seem unpromising, to say the least. The evidence is stacked against her, but upon examination, the Bible actually contains significant clues that warrant a closer look at her story, and which should raise doubts about any negative opinions of Tamar. For starters, her descendants do not regard her as a skeleton best hidden in the family closet. Moments when you think Tamar's shady chapter of family history should remain behind closed doors are precisely the moments when they bring her out into the light. She is publicly named in a wedding blessing at the marriage of Boaz and Ruth. Oh. Now remember, Ruth is sort of, in many circles, put up as the epitome of, a redeemed woman, a woman who, left her pagan culture to come be a part of the Hebrew culture. So why would we stick Tamar's name in a blessing for the marriage of Boaz and Ruth? Two individuals of sterling character. This seems to be hardly a fitting moment to deal with the subject of a family scandal. Yet, she is there in glowing words of blessings. In Ruth 4, verse 12, it says, "Through the offspring the Lord gives you by this young woman, may your family be like that of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah." She's in a blessing. Significantly, both King David and his son Absalom both named their daughters Tamar. In the Hebrew culture, names carried a lot of weight. For parents chose names that gave their children reasons to aspire, not as cause for shame or for them to be ridiculed. Then, of course, the Apostle Matthew names Tamar amongst four other women in the royal genealogy of Jesus in Matthew 1 and 3. A noticeable break from customary exclusion of women from genealogies and reason to re examine those other women's stories too. So, if it was customary to not mention women in genealogy, then why does Matthew take the time to mention four of them? Story. When none other than Judah himself describes her as righteous. Genesis 38, verse 26. How can the shameful actions of Tamar actually be considered righteous? We will look at that on tomorrow. I want to thank you for your time and attention today. This has been another episode of Daring Dialogues, and I have been your host, Shantae Charles. I hope that I have shared something with you that will get you thinking, and hopefully you will go today and take a look at Genesis 38. Breaking news as we close out. It seems that charges against Jussie Smollett may have been dropped. Go check it out. Remember, light is the most daring opposition to darkness, so please go out today and be light. Tell a woman thank you today. Tell a woman who has impacted your life, impacted your heart, impacted your finances, impacted your relationship status. Tell them today, thank you. Take care and God bless.